The stars went dark one by one across the galaxy, not because they burned out, but because something was eating the light itself. Commander of the Empire watched his home world's sun flicker like a dying candle through the bridge windows of his flagship. His people had controlled energy for 1,000 years. They could make stars burn brighter or dim them to whispers. But this was different. This was wrong. "Sir, the readings make no sense," his officer reported, her voice shaking. "Space itself is bending. Reality is breaking apart." Nodded grimly. 3 days ago, ships had appeared from nowhere, not from hyperspace or wormholes. They came from the spaces between spaces, from the empty black that existed before existence began. The Void Heralds, they called themselves. Their ships were impossible to look at directly. They hurt the mind. They were there and not there at the same time. Some were shaped like twisted metal. Others looked like living nightmares made of shadow and lightning. The largest ones seemed to be made of pure darkness that ate whatever light touched them. The Herald ships moved through space like sharks through water. They ignored all weapons fire. Energy beams passed through them. Missiles exploded harmlessly against their hulls. Worse, just being near them filled every living thing with terror that went deeper than fear. It was the kind of horror that made strong warriors curl up like children and cry. On the planet Prime, the great collective mind that connected billions of beings suddenly went silent. The collective had never been quiet in recorded history. Every member always shared thoughts and feelings with the others. But when the Void Heralds arrived, the entire hive mind simply stopped talking. They were too afraid to even think. The warrior clans have put up the only real fight at first. Their battle cry had echoed through space for centuries. Death before dishonor. They charged the Herald ships in their war vessels, roaring ancient songs of victory. The Herald response was simple and terrible. One of their ships pointed at the fleet. Reality twisted. Where there had been 50,000 warrior ships and brave fighters, there was suddenly nothing. Not destroyed, not scattered, simply nothing, as if they had never existed at all. The remaining clans laid down their weapons and wept. Across the galaxy, the pattern repeated. The proud aquatic cities of Nereid surrendered after watching their ocean worlds turn to steam with a thought. The machine intelligence of the central worlds shut down their networks rather than face whatever the Heralds might do to artificial minds. The Trading Federation of the Outer Rim offered all their wealth and begged for mercy. And then came the message that every world received at exactly the same time, in every language, speaking directly into the minds of every living being. "We are the Void Heralds. We have consumed 97 Galaxies before yours. We offer the same choice we have offered all others. Submit completely. Surrender 90% of your RESOURCES and populate for our consumption. Serve the remaining 10% as our willing SLAVES, or face total annihilation. You have 7 of your days to decide." The message came with images that burned themselves into every mind that received them. Galaxies turned to ash. Entire civilizations reduced to empty space. Trillions of beings screaming as reality itself devoured them. The Void Heralds showed their work like artists proud of their masterpieces. Most worlds surrendered within hours. The Empire, masters of stellar engineering, sent their formal submission after watching the Heralds delete their capital planet by simply willing it out of existence. The planet didn't explode or burn. One moment it was there, home to 12 billion souls. The next moment there was empty space where it had been, not even debris to mark its passing. The surrender documents flooded in from every corner of the galaxy. Ancient empires that had ruled for millions of years. Young species that had just discovered space travel. Machine intelligences older than most stars. All of them chose submission over extinction. The Void Heralds accepted each surrender with cold satisfaction. Their massive ships moved through space like hungry shadows, positioning themselves over conquered worlds to begin the harvest. They would take what they wanted and leave behind just enough to keep their new slaves alive and working. By the sixth day, only one world had not responded to the ultimatum. It was a small blue planet in an unremarkable solar system on the outer edge of the galaxy. The world was called Earth by its inhabitants, a species called humans. The Herald Scouts had already examined it. The planet showed signs of recent nuclear war, environmental damage, and ongoing conflicts between different groups of its people. Its technology was primitive compared to the galaxy's great civilizations. The Herald commander assigned to Earth expected the quickest surrender yet. These humans couldn't even travel faster than light. They still used chemical rockets to reach their own moon. Their weapons were crude explosives and basic energy projection. They had no shields, no reality manipulation, no ability to bend space or time. As the seventh day arrived, the Great Herald flagship moved into Earth's solar system. It was a vessel the size of a moon, made of twisted metal that seemed to exist in several dimensions at once. Its presence alone had been enough to make entire civilizations surrender in terror. The commander opened a channel to Earth and waited for their surrender message. Instead, he received something he had never heard before in 97 galaxies of conquest. "This is Earth. We received your message. Here is our answer. Come and take it." The commander stared at his communications array in confusion. The translation systems must have malfunctioned. No species had ever responded to a Herald ultimatum with defiance. It was impossible. The fear projections alone should have broken their will completely. He checked the readings again. The humans were definitely afraid. Their terror levels were exactly what the Heralds expected, but somehow, impossibly, they were still saying no. For the first time in his existence, a Void Herald felt something he had never experienced before: confusion. On Earth, humanity began preparing for war against beings that could erase reality itself. They did not know they could win. They did not even know if they could fight, but they knew one thing that the galaxy had forgotten. Some things were worth dying for. The emergency session at the United Nations had never seen anything like it. Representatives from every country on Earth sat in the same room, and for the first time in decades, nobody was arguing about borders or trade deals or old grudges. Secretary General Maria Santos stood at the podium, looking out at faces that showed the same expression she felt in her own heart: determination mixed with terror. Behind her, a massive screen showed the Herald flagship hanging in space beyond Pluto like a dark omen. "Ladies and," she began, her voice steady despite everything. 3 hours ago, we told beings who have destroyed 97 galaxies that they cannot have our world. I want to make sure everyone understands what this means." General Wei of the Chinese People's Liberation Army stood up. "It means we fight, all of us together. No more separate armies, no more competing nations, just humans." President Williams of the United States nodded. "We're sharing everything. All technology, all resources, all intelligence, starting now." Russian Premier laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Sharing with enemies to fight a worse enemy. My grandfather would have called this crazy." "Your grandfather never faced the end of everything," replied Prime Minister from the African Federation. "Crazy times need crazy solutions." Across the world, something unprecedented was happening. Military bases that had pointed weapons at each other for decades suddenly opened their doors to foreign soldiers. Scientists who had spent their careers hiding research from other countries started uploading everything to shared databases. Factories that made cars began retooling to build weapons. People who had never agreed on anything found themselves working side by side. In the deep bunkers beneath CERN, Dr. Sarah Mitchell stared at readings that shouldn't exist. She was humanity's leading expert on particle physics, and the data from the Herald ships made no sense at all. "They're not just bending space-time," she muttered to her Russian colleague, "Doctor. They're treating the laws of physics like suggestions." nodded grimly. Look at this energy signature. They're drawing power from somewhere that doesn't exist in our reality. Can we fight that? I don't know, but we can try to understand it. Around them, the world's greatest minds worked together for the first time ever. American physicists shared classified research with Chinese engineers. Israeli computer specialists collaborated with Iranian mathematicians. European philosophers worked alongside African tribal shamans to understand how the heralds thought. The results were both promising and terrifying. Dr. James from MIT had spent his life studying nuclear fusion. Now he stood in a room with scientists from 12 countries, explaining his wildest idea. The heralds expect us to use conventional weapons, he said. Energy beams, missiles, explosions. But they've seen all that before. What if we use something they've never encountered? Like what? Asked Doctor from Tokyo University. James grinned like a man who had gone slightly insane. What if we nuke them with love songs? The room went quiet. Then Doctor started laughing. You know what? That's crazy enough it might work. The idea was simple and completely mad. The heralds fed on fear and terror. They expected their enemies to be afraid. But humans had spent thousands of years creating art, music, and stories that expressed every emotion possible. What would happen if they broadcast the complete works of human culture directly into herald ships? We flood them with everything at once, explained Dr. Mitchell. And in death metal, Shakespeare and comic books and internet memes, love poems and cooking shows and cat videos, everything we are. Meanwhile, in the Pentagon, generals who had planned to fight each other were now planning to fight gods. General Hayes looked at the holographic display showing Earth's defenses. It's not enough, she said bluntly. We have 12,000 nuclear warheads, but they can just erase them from existence. General Wu from China's military nodded. Conventional tactics won't work. We need to think like humans, not like soldiers. What does that mean? Wu smiled grimly. Humans are the species that invented kamikaze attacks, suicide bombers, and last stands. We're the people who charge machine guns with swords because it's the right thing to do. The heralds have conquered species that think logically. They've never fought a species that thinks with its heart. Around the world, ordinary people were making extraordinary choices. Farmers in Kansas started growing food using techniques that would feed armies. Factory workers in Germany began building weapons they didn't understand from blueprints drawn by quantum physicists. Children in schools practiced emergency drills not for earthquakes or fires, but for reality-breaking attacks. The internet became humanity's nervous system. Every person with a computer started working on some part of the war effort. Gamers analyzed herald movement patterns. Artists created propaganda posters. Musicians composed battle songs. Even social media influencers found themselves spreading messages of unity instead of selling products. But perhaps the strangest thing was happening in the quiet moments between the preparation for war. People were not just afraid, they were angry. Maria Santos sat in her office late at night, looking at messages from around the world. Children drawing pictures of humans fighting monsters. Elderly people volunteering for dangerous experiments. Teenagers writing angry songs about alien invaders. Her aide, Thomas, brought her coffee and sat down wearily. The Herald ship has been broadcasting fear signals for 6 hours straight, he reported. Psychological warfare. Our teams say it should have broken our will to fight by now. Maria sipped her coffee and looked out the window at New York City, where millions of lights still twinkled in defiance of the darkness above. Maybe they don't understand us as well as they think. Ma'am, they keep trying to make us afraid, but humans have a very specific relationship with fear. We make horror movies for entertainment. We jump out of airplanes for fun. We've been scaring ourselves on purpose for thousands of years. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, So what happens when something tries to scare a species that has already imagined every possible nightmare? Maria smiled, and for the first time in days it was a real smile. I think we're about to find out. High above Earth, the Void Herald commander studied the readings from his fear projection systems. According to every instrument, the humans should have surrendered hours ago. Their terror levels were exactly what the heralds expected. Yet somehow, the fear was only making them angrier. For the first time in 97 galaxies, a Void Herald was beginning to suspect he might have made a mistake. The attack came at dawn. The Void Herald flagship descended toward Earth like a falling moon made of nightmares. As it moved, reality bent around it. The sky turned purple and green. Gravity pulled in wrong directions. Time moved in stutters and jerks. In the command center, buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, General Hayes watched the instruments go crazy as space itself began to break down. "Sir, we're reading temporal distortions over Colorado," reported Lieutenant Martinez. "Time is running backwards in some places. Energy weapons charging, but they're pulling power from dimensions that don't exist," added Sergeant. General Hayes nodded calmly. 6 months ago, none of this would have made sense. Now, after studying Herald technology, her people had learned to expect the impossible. "All units, this is Big Sky. The dance is starting. Remember, we're not trying to win the first round. We're trying to learn how they fight." The Herald commander, floating in his ship's control center that existed in 7 dimensions at once, felt confident. He had seen this moment thousands of times before. The primitive species would fire their crude weapons. The weapons would fail. Then the species would break and surrender. He gestured, and reality obeyed. New York City simply stopped existing. One moment, 8 million people were going about their morning routines. The next moment, there was a perfectly smooth crater where the city had been, as if it had never been built at all. But something was wrong. The Herald commander expected screaming, panic, surrender messages. Instead, his communications array exploded with angry human voices. "This is General Wu to all units. They just killed New York. I want every one of those bastards to pay for it. Moscow base to all forces. We've lost contact with the East Coast. Weapons free, weapons free. This is Admiral Jackson, Pacific Fleet. They want to fight dirty. Let's show them dirty." The Herald commander felt the first flicker of something he had never experienced: confusion. Where were the surrender messages? Where was the terror-induced paralysis that always followed his demonstrations of power? Instead, 10,000 human missiles launched from hidden sites around the world. The Herald ship's defenses activated automatically, bending space to make the missiles miss or simply erasing them from existence. But something was strange about these weapons. They weren't trying to hit the ship. The missiles detonated in a perfect sphere around the Herald vessel, each one carrying not explosives, but something the Heralds had never seen used as a weapon: pure human culture. Every song ever recorded, every book ever written, every movie, every piece of art, every joke, every love letter, every recipe, every children's story, every scientific theory, every sports cheer, every prayer, every curse word in every human language. The Herald ship's reality sensors, designed to detect fear and despair, suddenly found themselves flooded with 10,000 years of human creativity broadcast at maximum power. The effect was immediate and devastating. Beings that fed on terror and submission suddenly experienced joy, wonder, love, curiosity, humor, anger, determination, and 1,000 other emotions they had never felt. Their reality-warping technology, designed to bend space according to their will, began producing random effects as their minds reeled from the emotional overload. Parts of the Herald ship began turning pink. Other sections started playing classical music. Gravity inside the vessel began operating according to cartoon physics. But the humans weren't done. In laboratories around the world, scientists had been studying captured Herald technology for months. They couldn't replicate it, but they had learned something important. It responded to consciousness and will. Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood in her lab, watching as her jury-rigged machines did something that violated every law of physics she knew. "Are you seeing this?" Doctor nodded, grinning like a madman. "According to these readings, we just taught our nuclear warheads to think." The idea was completely insane, which made it perfectly human. If Herald technology responded to consciousness, what would happen if they gave consciousness to human weapons? The answer was chaos. Nuclear missiles that had been flying simple ballistic trajectories suddenly began exhibiting creativity. Some of them started dancing through the air, spiraling and looping as they approached their targets. Others began splitting into smaller versions of themselves, each one thinking independently. One missile, apparently deciding that nuclear explosions were, converted itself into a giant firework that spelled out, "Earth sends its regards," in letters visible from orbit. The Herald commander tried to regain control of the situation, but his ship was no longer responding properly. His reality-warping weapons kept producing unexpected results. When he tried to delete more human cities, instead he accidentally created copies of them floating in space. When he attempted to project terror, his systems began broadcasting Earth's cooking shows instead. On Earth, humanity watched their impossible plan actually working and decided to get even crazier. "All units, this is Big Sky," General Hayes announced. "The cultural bombardment is working. Time for Phase 2, begin Operation Spite." Operation Spite was humanity's most audacious plan yet. If they couldn't match Herald technology, they would do something no other species had ever attempted. They would deliberately break it. Around the world, humans began sabotaging the laws of physics. Nuclear reactors were modified to produce energy that didn't exist. Particle accelerators were reconfigured to create matter that followed the wrong rules. Radio telescopes began broadcasting mathematical equations that had no solutions directly into the Herald ship's sensors. The humans had discovered something important about Herald technology. It worked by imposing order on reality. But humans specialized in creative chaos. Children's toys were with quantum computers. Kitchen appliances were turned into broadcast stations. Video games were modified to simulate impossible universes and then transmitted directly to Herald minds. In space, the Herald flagship began to malfunction in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Its hull started changing colors in response to human emotions broadcast from Earth. Its weapon systems began drawing power from children's imaginations. Its navigation computers became infected with human music and started plotting courses to non-existent planets named things like and Wonderland. The Herald Commander, a being that had never felt confusion in millions of years of existence, found himself completely lost. His species had conquered 97 galaxies, being the most feared predators in existence. They were masters of terror, chaos, and destruction. But they had never fought a species that treated terror as entertainment, chaos as an art form, and destruction as just another engineering problem to solve. As the first day of battle ended, the Void Herald flagship hung in space above Earth, its once terrifying appearance now marred by rainbow-colored patches and sections that seemed to be humming show tunes. In his command center, the Herald commander stared at his instruments and tried to understand what had gone wrong. According to every reading, the humans were still terrified. Their fear levels hadn't dropped at all. But somehow, impossibly, the fear was making them more dangerous, not less. For the first time in his species' history, a Void Herald began to wonder if they had chosen the wrong galaxy to invade. 3 weeks into the war, the galaxy watched in stunned silence as the impossible happened. Earth was winning. not winning in the traditional sense of destroying enemy ships or conquering territory. Earth was winning by being so completely, magnificently weird that the Void Heralds couldn't figure out how to fight them. In the observation station orbiting the dead world of Prime, Commander stared at the data streams coming from Earth's solar system. His sensors showed readings that made no scientific sense. "Sir," his officer reported, her voice filled with disbelief, "the humans have somehow taught their moon to sing." Looked at the displays. Earth's moon was indeed broadcasting music into space. Not just any music, but what the humans called death metal mixed with classical symphonies and what appeared to be whale songs. The combined effect was so strange that herald ships approaching from that direction had begun flying in circles. "How is that possible?" "We don't know, sir. They also appear to have turned their space station into a giant disco ball. And, sir, they've started launching grandmother recipes at the Herald fleet." "What?" "Cooking instructions, sir. Thousands of them. The Herald ships are trying to process them as tactical data, but apparently the concept of seasoned to taste is causing system failures." Sat down heavily. His people had surrendered to the Heralds because they seemed unbeatable. Now he was watching a primitive world fight them with grandmother recipes and having success. On Earth, Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood in her laboratory, which no longer looked like any laboratory that had ever existed. Her equipment had been rebuilt so many times with salvaged Herald technology that it operated on principles that shouldn't work. "Look at this," she called to her colleague. "I think we've accidentally invented magic." Doctor came over and stared at the machine she had built. It appeared to be made of computer parts, kitchen appliances, children's toys, and what looked like a disco ball. But somehow, it was converting Herald reality warping energy into something useful. "What does it do?" he asked. "I'm not entirely sure," Sarah admitted. "But when I fed it the complete works of Shakespeare and pressed this button marked maybe, it turned 3 Herald fighters into giant rubber ducks." Nodded as if this made perfect sense. After 3 weeks of fighting reality-warping aliens, the impossible had become routine. Did the ducks surrender? "No, but they're following our space station around making angry quacking noises. I think we confused them." This was the fundamental problem the Void Heralds faced. They were used to fighting species that approached problems logically. When presented with a challenge, most species analyzed it, developed a strategy, and implemented a solution. Humans did something completely different. When presented with a challenge, they would stare at it for a while, declare it stupid, and then solve it using whatever happened to be lying around, usually in ways that violated several laws of physics and common sense. The Herald commanders had stopped trying to predict human behavior after the Great Duct Tape Incident of the second week, when human engineers had somehow used ordinary duct tape to repair holes in reality itself. In the Herald flagship, the commander floated in what remained of his control center. Half of his systems had been infected with something the humans called memes, and his tactical computers now insisted on communicating only through pictures of cats with amusing captions. His second-in-command approached, moving carefully around the areas where gravity had decided to work sideways. "Sir, we have a problem." "Another one." "The humans have figured out how to weaponize their children's music." The commander felt something that might have been the beginning of a headache, though his species didn't normally experience pain. "Explain." "They're broadcasting something called Baby Shark directly into our neural networks. Our soldiers are experiencing system crashes after 17 seconds of exposure." The commander closed his eyes, which was a mistake, because his eyelids had been infected with human advertising jingles. "What about our reality deletion weapons?" "Still malfunctioning, sir. Every time we try to erase a human city, we accidentally create a theme park instead. Yesterday we tried to delete London and ended up building a giant tea shop in space. And our fear projectors. The humans have started reviewing them, sir. They're giving our psychological warfare broadcast star ratings and suggesting improvements. Some of them have started requesting specific nightmares. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, human ingenuity was reaching new heights of absurdity. The International Space Station had been converted into what the crew called Command Central for Impossible Things. It was here that humanity's greatest minds gathered to solve problems that didn't have solutions. Captain Lisa Park floated in the observation deck, watching as their latest experiment unfolded. They had taken a Herald energy weapon, combined it with a children's kaleidoscope, and somehow created a device that turned hostile thoughts into butterflies. "Status report," she called to her crew. "Well, Captain," replied Engineer, "the good news is we successfully turned a Herald dreadnought into a giant flower garden. The bad news is that the flowers are carnivorous and have started eating space debris." "Are they hostile?" "Hard to say. They keep trying to communicate, but they only speak in botanical Latin. Dr. Johnson thinks they're asking for fertilizer." Captain Park nodded. This was actually one of their more normal results. Last week, they had accidentally turned a Herald boarding party into a barbershop quartet that wouldn't stop singing show tunes. The real breakthrough came when humanity stopped trying to fight the Heralds and started trying to fix them. It was Dr. Martinez in Mexico City who first noticed it. The Herald soldiers they captured weren't evil monsters. They were beings so terrified of something even worse that they had become monsters themselves. "They're running from something," she explained to the Global Command Council. "The Void Heralds aren't conquerors, they're refugees." "From what?" asked General Hayes. "We're not sure yet, but whatever it is, they're more afraid of it than they are of death. That's why they feed on fear and terror. It's the only emotion they understand anymore." This changed everything. Instead of trying to destroy the Heralds, humans began trying to heal them. They broadcast not just culture and creativity, but compassion and hope. They sent messages of understanding instead of threats. And slowly, impossibly, it began to work. Herald soldiers started surrendering not because they were defeated, but because they were curious. They had never encountered a species that responded to invasion with offers of friendship. The Herald commander found himself facing a problem no military manual had ever covered. How do you fight an enemy that keeps trying to help you? When human negotiators approached his ship under a flag of truce, he agreed to meet with them, partly because his tactical computers had been taken over by human chess programs and wouldn't stop challenging him to games. The human ambassador was a small, elderly woman named who brought with her a thermos of tea and a plate of homemade cookies. "We understand you're afraid," she told the commander gently. "We understand you're running from something terrible, but destroying civilizations won't save you. Working together might." For the first time in millions of years, a Void Herald sat down to have tea with his enemies and talked about something other than surrender terms. Across the galaxy, other species watched and wondered if they had missed something important about courage, creativity, and the power of simply refusing to give up hope. The war was far from over, but something fundamental had changed. The Heralds were no longer certain they wanted to win. The final battle didn't look like any battle in galactic history. Instead of fleets of warships firing devastating weapons at each other, it was 10,000 Herald vessels surrounding Earth while humans broadcast cooking shows, played music, and sent care packages full of books and art supplies. In the Herald flagship's converted conference room, which now served tea and cookies alongside warfare planning, the commander sat across from and tried to understand what had gone wrong with his conquest. "Your species makes no sense," he told her, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting logic itself for months. You should have surrendered. Every other species surrenders. Poured more tea, a skill she had perfected over 70 years of being a grandmother. Maybe that's why they lost, she said gently. Sometimes the only way to win is to not play the game the way your opponent expects. But you are afraid. Our sensors detect your fear constantly. Of course we're afraid. We're terrified. But being afraid doesn't mean we have to give up. Fear can make you stronger if you don't let it make you smaller. The commander stared at his teacup, which had somehow begun glowing with soft, warm light. Even the beverages on human ships had been infected with hope. What do you want from us? We want to help you, said simply. We know you're running from something. We know you've been afraid for so long that you forgot what it felt like to not be afraid. But you don't have to keep running. On Earth, the final phase of humanity's impossible plan was taking shape. If they couldn't beat the heralds with weapons and they couldn't reason with them using logic, then they would do what humans did best. They would adopt them. Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood in her laboratory, now expanded to include herald scientists who had volunteered to work with their former enemies. The cultural exchange had produced remarkable results. Show them the harmony generator, she said to her herald colleague, a being that looked like a cross between a squid and a theorem. Activated a device that shouldn't have existed. It was part human engineering, part herald reality manipulation, and part pure creative chaos. When activated, it produced something unprecedented, a field that made fear impossible to maintain. Not by removing fear, but by surrounding it with so much wonder, curiosity, and hope that the fear became just another interesting emotion instead of a controlling force. How does it work? Asked Dr. We don't know, admitted, whose species had spent millions of years understanding exactly how their technology worked. Sarah taught it how to love, and it figured out the rest on its own. This was the fundamental change that humanity had brought to the galaxy. They didn't just fight enemies, they transformed them. They didn't just solve problems, they made the problems want to be solved. The breakthrough came when the Herald Commander finally told the truth about what they were running from. There is something in the void beyond the galaxies, he explained, his voice dropping to a whisper. Something that makes us look like children playing with toys. We call it the hunger. It consumes not just matter and energy but concepts themselves. Hope, love, courage, creativity. It devours them all and leaves behind only emptiness. Nodded thoughtfully. And you thought that if you became monsters it wouldn't notice you. We thought that if we destroyed everything else first, there would be nothing left for the hunger to take from us. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard, said and meant it. But you were wrong about one thing. You can't protect yourself by destroying what makes life worth protecting. That night, Earth made its final broadcast to the galaxy. Not just to the heralds, but to every world that had surrendered, every civilization that had given up hope. President Santos spoke from the United Nations, but her words were translated into 1,000 languages and broadcast by herald technology to reach every corner of space. People of the galaxy, she began, we are not stronger than the Void Heralds. We are not smarter than them. We are not more advanced than them. But we are more stubborn than them, and sometimes that's enough. The heralds came to our world expecting us to surrender because that's what everyone else had done. But humans have a very bad habit of not doing what we're supposed to do. When someone tells us something is impossible, we take it as a personal challenge. We learned something important fighting the heralds. They weren't really our enemies. They were just afraid like all of us. And when you're afraid, it's easy to think that destroying others will save you. But that's not how courage works. Courage isn't not being afraid. Courage is being afraid and helping someone else anyway. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to turn this fleet of herald ships into the first line of defense for everyone in this galaxy. Not because we have to, but because we want to. Because when something threatens our neighbors, it threatens us too. And when the real threat comes, this hunger that has the heralds so afraid, we're going to meet it the same way we met the heralds, with terrible jokes, impossible solutions, and the absolute refusal to accept that anything is hopeless. We invite every world, every species, every being in this galaxy to join us, not as subjects or servants, but as friends. Because humans have learned something that the rest of the galaxy forgot. You're always stronger when you're not alone. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The Empire sent engineering teams to help retrofit Herald ships. The collective of shared their hive mind technology to create faster communication networks. The clans volunteered their warriors for the defense fleet. Even species that had been enemies set aside their differences to join humanity's impossible crusade. Within a year, the galaxy had transformed from a collection of terrified subjects into an alliance of free peoples, with Earth as its unlikely heart. The Herald commander, who had chosen to take the human name, Hope, much to his own surprise, stood on the observation deck of his flagship, now painted with images of Earth's flowers and children's drawings. He watched as ships from 100 worlds practiced maneuvers together, preparing for a threat that might never come. Joined him, bringing tea as always. She had become something like the galaxy's grandmother, dispensing wisdom and cookies to species she couldn't even pronounce the names of. "Any regrets?" she asked him. Hope considered the question seriously. His people had gone from being the most feared force in the galaxy to being babysitters, teachers, and part-time comedians, depending on what each world needed. "I never knew tea could taste this good," he admitted. "My species had forgotten that food was supposed to be enjoyable." Smiled. "That's what happens when you stop being afraid all the time. You start noticing the good things again." As they watched, a group of young humans and Herald children played together in the ship's newly built playground, their laughter echoing through halls that had once known only the sounds of conquest. The galaxy had learned a new word, humans, but more importantly, it had remembered an old one, hope. And somewhere in the void beyond the stars, ancient hunger stirred and began moving toward a galaxy that had forgotten how to be afraid, led by a small blue world whose people had the audacious idea that even the impossible could be defeated with enough creativity, stubbornness, and really good tea. The humans were still scared. They were always scared, but they had taught the galaxy something important. Being afraid and giving up were two completely different choices. And humanity had never been very good at giving up.